Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session on algorithmic power, justice, and repression. My name is Sebastian Prost. I'm a lecturer at City St. George's in London, and I'm your session chair today. This is a large space. If you can move closer to the stage, that's appreciated. And if you want to ask questions, our lovely student volunteers will be with the mic somewhere here in the middle in the front. So to not have them run around in the audience, if you could come forward to ask your questions, that would be nice. We have 7 very exciting, very important presentations coming up. And we'll start with the first one now. Houda Elmimouni from the University of Manitoba, presenting Silencing and Surging, a layered ecology of algorithmic repression and resistance in the Gaza escalations.
Hello, everyone. How do you speak of data when data have faces you know? And how you analyze this data when some of it may be someone's last words? For over 2 years, Gaza has been under fire. We watched on screens in disbelief, in rage, as lives were torn apart in real time. Some of the people in our data sets are no longer alive. One lost 21 family members in a single day. Others vanished from timelines, not because they stopped speaking, but because they were erased from platforms and from the world. So before we begin, this talk is for those who spoke and are now gone, not offline, gone. And for those who are still here, but forced into silence, into hiding, quieted by fear. As researchers, we found ourselves in an impossible role, trying to document, to make sense, while also grieving, and while raging, and while questioning what sense can even mean. What is an algorithm for a mother burying her child? What is content moderation for someone watching their home collapse? And yet, this is exactly why we are here, because we saw the same pattern again and again. A post goes up, it gets reported, removed, sometimes it returns, thanks to appeals, and then vanishes again. We call it moderation. They live it as suffocation. So the question becomes, when visibility becomes survival, what does it take to stay seen? We began working on this topic since 2021, the topic of content moderation on social media, during the Sheikh Jarrah protests. And as we wrote, the context did not freeze in time. It bled into the present, into the current genocidal war on Gaza, into our daily lives, and into the lives of those whose testimonies we study. So the question became more urgent. How do people continue to speak, document, and mobilize when platforms are simultaneously enabling and constraining visibility? Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge that this topic we're discussing is both polarizing and deeply emotional. It's not just a sensitive topic to many, but also for our team. Our group of authors, composed of Sarah, Yarden, Norah, Konstantin, Tashfia, Mahmoud, Ghadeer, Walid, Volker, Peter, and I, Houda, is a diverse team spanning different countries, religions, and genders. But we're all connected to the region through our ties to it or our close work in it. This diversity has enriched our perspectives, but it also makes this subject deeply personal for us. We welcome discussions and questions beyond this talk. The authors in bold are here present, and they're welcome into your questions. To situate this work, we focus on the war on Gaza, beginning in October 2023. But this was not the beginning of violence. For decades, Gaza has faced repeated assaults and blockades, including major escalations in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, 2021. What changed in October 7, or after October 7, is the intensity of destruction, displacement, and loss. In this context, social media became critical. A space for help, to be seen, but also a space of restriction, a megaphone and a muzzle. We saw this dynamic during the Sheikh Jarrah events in 2021, and we see it again here. And this is where our prior work begins. Our earlier work in Group 2024 examined what platforms censored during Sheikh Jarrah and showing how over-enforcement unfolded. Then in our first Monday 2024, we looked at the algorithms highlighting linguistic and geographic bias. At KAI 2025, Magdy and colleagues asked who defines acceptable speech for Arabic content. And then in our CCW work, we began examining how people respond. Through emerging resistance strategies, this paper extends that trajectory. We shift from platform decisions to the ongoing interaction between moderation and response, focusing on how visibility is continuously contested and how people work to sustain it. Building on that shift from platform decisions to lived experience, this paper asks two questions. First, what are the lived and practical consequences of repeated removals, downranking, and account sanctions during the war on Gaza? Second, what forms of resistance emerge in response? So at a high level, we are interested in both sides of this dynamic, the harm, but also the socio-technical work people do to keep visibility alive under sanction. We use patchwork ethnography to study a fast-moving, high-risk context. Our corpus covers October 2023 to August 2025 and combines two data sets, 295 Instagram event cases and 85 NGO and press documents. We then apply reflexive thematic analysis, organizing findings into 3 layers and plus a cross-cutting theme. Our first concept is the contest loop. We use this deliberately because visibility is not decided once. It is continuously contested. Building on work in platform governance and coordinated reporting, we show that moderation is co-produced by hostile actors that we call hostile brigades in the paper, platform systems, and supporter networks, which we call, again, supporting brigades. The loop begins with a post. That could be a documentation or an advocacy post. For example, a video of an airstrike or a call for medical aid. This post may get reported, platforms act through removals, but also quieter fictions, such as downranking. Sometimes the post is still there, but few people can see it. Supporters then respond through appeals, mirrors, migration, trying to restore visibility. And this feeds back into the system, triggering it all over again. So visibility is not a single decision. It is a struggle repeated over time. We unpack this loop across 3 layers. First, the affective layer, that is to say, how it feels or what it feels. People describe a kind of whiplash. Posts go up, come down, sometimes they come back, a video disappears, reappears hours later, then vanishes again. And shadow banning feels like slow suffocation. Second is the mechanistic layer, meaning how it works. Through things like downranking, comment locks, and report raids, these are then met with appeals, mirroring, and migration. Over time, this becomes almost routine, even infrastructural. Third is the material layer, that is what it costs. Aid and outreach are disrupted, fundraisers stall, requests for help stop circulating, and then evidence can be lost. And visibility becomes something that has to be constantly rebuilt. So across all the 3 layers, visibility is not simply removed, it is constrained, contested, and continuously rebuilt. If the contest loop shows how visibility is contested, the second lens shows how it is sustained. We call this the resistance assemblage. That is a bottom-up infrastructure that keeps visibility alive under sanction. Building on work on platform assemblages, we shift the focus from the focus to the community side, how people collectively patch and reroute visibility. This includes mirrors and backups. For example, the same video is re-uploaded across dozens of accounts. Coordinated appeals, where people, for example, sharing templates, report this as template of how to report this as a mistake. And everyday care, like boosting a post by posting emojis, etc. But while this works, or may work, it shifts the burden into communities, making visibility an ongoing unpaid form of labor. So if these lenses show how visibility is contested and sustained, what does this mean for design? Moderation in conflict is not just removal, it is an ongoing throttling. So interventions need to target key points, like reduce report brigading, strengthen appeals, protect evidence. But this is not only a design problem. It is also about measurement and policy, not just counting removals, but tracking frictions, delays, and evidence loss. Because the issue is not only what disappears, but how visibility is quietly reduced, delayed, and made fragile. We began with a question: what does an algorithm mean for a mother burying her child? We cannot fully answer that. But what we can show is how even under repeated restriction, people still find ways to speak, to resist, and to remember. This work was written during the Gaza war, but we document did not begin here, and it has not stopped. As researchers, we're taught to observe with care and write with distance. This proximity bred not only insight, but empathy. The kind of empathy any researcher feels when they encounter suffering so close and so raw. Distance was not possible. What we encountered was not just data, but lives, loss, and persistence. And this work is not just analysis. It is also a commitment to keep documenting, to keep making these dynamics visible, and to take seriously what is at stake when visibility itself becomes survival. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Thank you, Houda. Questions? I can ask a quick one. How do you see this going forward in the sense of the responsibility that the platforms have? How do you engage with Meta, for example?
But I don't have any direct design decisions that I can just say, like, this is what Meta needs to do. And now, like, I think it's getting trickier with AI, involving AI in moderation. But I think, like, for example, in moderation, instead of like using moderators who are not really part of the context and know what's going on in the context, then moderation will keep failing. Because what perspective are we using to moderate those posts? If that's a particular perspective, then probably like we will again fail the moderation pipeline.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Once again, give a round of applause to Houda. Next up, we have Adrian Petterson from the University of Toronto, presenting their paper titled Tooling Justice, Articulating Equity Work Through Design Toolkits.
Hi, yes, I'm Adrian Petterson from the University of Toronto. I'm presenting this paper on behalf of my co-authors, Carolyn Lee, Trevor Cross, Richmond Rong, and Priyank Chandra. Designers are facing huge challenges in industry. In 2025 and 2026, tech companies are doing large layoffs. New tools like LLMs are changing the way they work, and moral issues, like will my design be used for AI-driven war crimes, are arising faster than standards and perspectives can be established. In particular, early career designers are entering an unstable market with never-before-seen challenges. Oftentimes, early career designers are the only ones who end up doing the most advocacy work and hold the least amount of power in organizations. They are becoming familiar with the politics of their profession as well as learning how to do it. In the face of global industry instability, unprecedented moral questions, and lesser power, how can early career designers promote equity? HCI would like to suggest design equity toolkits. There's a load of these toolkits, many of which follow a similar aesthetic format with bright colors and abstract shapes. Toolkits can be really effective to quickly download information for people who might have limited capacity. They are shortcuts to a shared ontology, translating expertise in a stepwise, manageable chunks. However, prior work in HCI has critiqued toolkits, noting that they are too general to be effective across diverse situations, noting also a lack of guidance to complex problems. They also risk techno-solutionist mindsets, as if somebody has achieved equity if they follow the steps in the toolkit, which, of course, is never a guarantee. So, because these toolkits are growing in number and accompanying critique, we wanted to investigate how early career designers looking at very complex industry landscapes would understand design equity toolkits, how they anticipate using those toolkits. We also wanted to see how toolkit creators were imagining their toolkits in use. Therefore, we asked the question, how do toolkit creators and early career designers align and differ in their desired attributes for designerly equity and toolkits and their envisioned applications in practice? We are expanding on our previous work, you can find it on the QR code here, in which we defined equity toolkits for design as intentionally organized sets of tools or methods to approach issues of systemic oppression in design, as well as explicit suggestions of how those tools or methods can be in use. We noted that design equity toolkits did present a best practice, but reinforced existing attributes in design by orienting language towards design professionals. The focus was on bringing more diverse users, but not actually including those diverse populations in the actual design process. Therefore, in this work, we also wanted to distinguish between two types of equity that have important roles in design work. First, product and process equity, which investigates how methods, partnerships, and outcomes redistribute power and mitigate harm in situated projects. But then also workplace and organizational equity, which asks who is empowered and resourced to pursue equity work. To investigate the shared and different perspectives of these toolkits between toolkit creators and prospective users, we followed a two-phase research process. First, we interviewed creators of design equity toolkits from our prior work. We reached out to their creators through public-facing contact info. We selected toolkit creator participants based on their enthusiasm to have their toolkits judged by junior designers and our research team. They all generously agreed to be named in the paper to be acknowledged for their work. In the second phase, we recruited early career designers through a master's in design program. While they were all still students, participants had experience working in industry through practicums, internships, and co-op positions. We asked them to propose a student advocacy issue to apply the toolkits to, deciding on 3 final issues, including retaining hybrid course structures to support remote students, increasing Black, Indigenous, and people of color representation in design courses, and creating spaces for commuter students to rest and study within the faculty's building. We used a walkthrough demonstration to test the toolkits, which supports participants to judge the content of the toolkit rather than the startup challenges of learning a new resource. Starting with the findings from the toolkit creator interviews, We found that toolkit creators had the following attributes that they prioritized when designing their toolkits. So simplicity, usability, flexibility, plurality, reflection, and officiality. I'll quickly run through a few of these, but please see our paper for a more in-depth explanation of these findings. First, the toolkits had to be simple. They should be easily understood and minimal startup requirements for use. But they also had to be flexible as well as plural. The toolkit should be adaptable across different scenarios, but also relevant and accessible to diverse audiences and forms of expertise. Most importantly to the toolkit creators is that their toolkits would prompt critical reflection on design decisions and their equity implications. The toolkits also needed to be official. They needed to serve as a credible artifact that legitimizes equity work within organizations by supporting designers and justifying the importance of equity-focused design to their supervisors or stakeholders. Now for the findings from the early career designers, in contrast. Generally, workshop participants were very, very positive about the toolkits, as demonstrated by the hyperbolic statement that occurred at the beginning of the workshop. One participant said, 1,000,000% agreed, like it would be great to have this in class, like I'm bookmarking every single one of these. However, participants did articulate some tensions they experienced with toolkits in use. They acknowledged that while the toolkits seemed helpful, they might not actually redistribute power in design work, particularly if the design team has not already been sensitized to equity issues. For example, saying, can you give this to any design team, or can you only give this to a certain kind of design team? Although workshop participants were not directly asked about the aesthetics of the toolkits, as design students, they pointed out the value of the visual representation, sharing that they found some of the toolkits as humorous, cute, or meaningful. At the same time, the workshop participants critiqued when there was too much text on the page, or if it was even too Silicon Valley-esque, which pointed out Silicon Valley's reputation for less than equitable design outcomes. Most importantly, the workshop participants were imagining design equity work as mediators, which could help them convince their colleagues and superiors to care about design equity, which is labor they explicitly expressed concern about. For our discussion, based on our findings, we assert that workshop attendees were imagining the ways design equity toolkits could support or perform articulation work, the often invisible work of coordinating distributed tasks, aligning worker efforts, and meshing activities across organizational boundaries, often supported by mechanisms like schedules and boundary objects. Firstly, design toolkits have the potential of providing essential information about design equity, particularly to help establish common ground, getting everybody on the same page to move work forward. As a result of that common ground, toolkits can help design equity advocates in aligning stakeholders across departments and audience towards equitable values. Since early career designers often lack authority in organizations, importantly, toolkits can support them in promoting design equity through visibility and legitimacy. Equity work is oftentimes an afterthought in design, either saved to the end of the design process or done without compensation or support from organizers. Toolkits are a concrete artifact that make that work visible. Visibility of the work can then allow equity advocates to ask for resources and support in the organization, such as time and funding, through the expertise and authority given by the toolkit. The authority of the toolkits then also provide legitimacy to more diverse and plural approaches to design by calling for community participation and criticality. Therefore, we recommend for future design equity toolkits that toolkit creators think about the value of their kit in facilitating articulation work. Following up on workshop participants' concerns around real power distribution, we encourage toolkit creators to embrace a plurality of design worlds and perspectives, and sharing the authority to make decisions. Finally, the authority translated through creators' expertise can be used as a tool to legitimize the participation of diverse communities and start conversations around who is considered a designer. They're a resource towards inclusion, but only the first step in real distribution of power. We are by no means suggesting that toolkits can address the shifting job landscape or indeed solve moral conflict of designing military technologies. Toolkits are not sufficient to address the responsibilities and accompanying general anxieties of early career designers entering this unstable industry landscape. But we do suggest that design equity toolkits can support the work of design equity and lend legitimacy to design values for a more equitable future. Thank you, and please check out our work, either our previous paper or the one for the CHI conference today.
Thank you, Adrian. Questions from the audience? Yes. Mic behind you.
Hi, thank you so much for the very interesting talk. I was wondering if you can say a bit more about working with the master's students. What were the challenges? And I'm thinking in terms of teachers, students, relationships, and maybe what worked well and less well, because we're planning to do something quite similar, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest challenge working with these students is actually not that they were at all resistant to participating or anything like that, but actually that they were more enthusiastic than a usual audience would be. Many of these students had some expertise already in design equity because they were in a critical program. A professional program, but still with some critical perspectives. And so I do think that limited maybe some of the insights we could have gathered. But it also then did mean that they were all very, very enthusiastic to be participating in this research, which definitely made our job easier.
All right, thank you very much. Once again, a round of applause. And next up, we have Maria Luce Lupetti from the Politecnico di Torino, presenting their paper, Participatory AI Justice in HCI, a Scoping Review.
Okay. So, hi everybody. I'm really glad to be here, especially in this very important session, and I feel extremely privileged to be alongside this very important work and to present my work on participatory AI justice in HCI, also on behalf of my colleagues and friends, Cristina Zaga and Nazli Chila, who are in the audience. So let me start with a bit of positioning. We are 3 design researchers with expertise in participatory practices, working in technical universities, and we have been working on robotics and AI for some years now. And we find ourselves in a very particular, in a way, positive moment, because we find our expertise really relevant in this current wave of participatory AI. So we are kind of in a good spot, but at the same time, as other authors before us, we also see in this landscape a tendency to do participatory AI work in a way that tends to only inform and consult rather than partner with or delegate control to participants. And this really clashes with our intention and commitment to nurture diversity, equity, and inclusion, and interrogate power dynamics in socio-technical system design. And we also know, coming from a design background, that participatory design tradition itself is problematic. We know participatory design is inherently subject to inclusivity issues and power struggles, because, for instance, alternative ways of knowing are devalued in face of scientific knowledge, radical issues that marginalize communities experience daily to access participation remain unattended, and very often design decisions are already taken at the time of engagement. And to these traditional problems of participatory design, AI adds many more, and I think there is a very strong tension that needs to be at least cited, and it's the one that participatory AI ambition to be inclusive and open to public deliberation clashes with the configuration and dynamics of the current AI landscape, in which is characterized by centrally owned yet globalized infrastructures governed by tech giants with explicit capitalist ambitions. So we join a stream of critical AI research work, especially in HCI, that tries to problematize this space. And what we try to do with this work is to build a holistic understanding on where the critical HCI community is at and what resources it offers when it comes to practicing justice-oriented PI work. We mostly reviewed full papers from flagship HCI conferences, having a clear commitment to critical AI, and also a couple of journals, such as Tokai and THRI. We ended up with a corpus of 26 beautiful articles. Check out the papers. For me, that list is already the resource. And we analyzed these papers through the lens of design justice, and specifically we abstracted the design justice principles. This choice was motivated by the fact that there was already a massive effort in translating social justice into something somehow actionable and very connected to the world of design, and we thought this would be very relevant for us. So we looked into why participation is done, and with no major surprise, we found that justice-oriented participatory AI research in HCI aspires to help building better AI systems, leveraging community engagement, and challenging power structures. When it comes to who involves, generally these are researchers and practitioners playing the role of facilitators, enabling co-creation, or experts guiding the studies, yet the modalities of these engagements vary significantly, ranging from maintaining clear boundaries between researchers and participants to cultivating more symmetrical partnerships where these roles blur. And in terms of who is involved, participants range from expert stakeholders to community members, again with no surprise, yet community-led organizations are involved in a handful of studies only, and this is a pity because we know that having real commitment and participation from community-led organizations can really make a change in these processes. And in terms of what is being designed, we see that justice-oriented PI work prioritizes knowledge production and social change over the development of AI artifacts. And here, participation is also supported by a vast array of design materials, such as tools, toolkits, as we saw before, prototypes, and other objects, but these are never the outcomes. Rather, these function as boundary objects. And in terms of how the participation unfolds, in the majority of works, participants are involved as informants to guide the design of the AI systems, or as testers and evaluators. In less studies, we find the work advocating for and attempting to implement equitable partnership where power and agency are shared. And also in terms of when, we know that ideally justice-oriented PI work should create opportunities for engagement and collaboration and participation throughout the whole AI lifecycle, but this happens only in a few cases. Only few papers report on doing that, and the majority of works focuses on early stages, where the focus is on really defining a problem. But based on these findings, we made two major considerations and reflections for what it takes to practicing participatory AI in our perspective. The first is that, in our opinion, practicing participatory AI in a justice-oriented way requires being an activist. And we argue for this because we see a lot of outstanding work actually coming from authors that are also members of unions or steering committee members of local coalitions or drawing on personal lived experiences in specific countries. And so this makes the boundaries between who involves and who is involved very blurred. And we believe that when the personal is at stake, then participatory AI work becomes a form of activism. But this identity, this hybrid identity, while being critical component to a meaningful participation, is also really tricky because it is something we cannot prescribe. We can't say a good participatory AI researcher should be also an activist. And also, it's really hard to maintain this kind of identity because it is hard to give continuity, for instance, to fundings. And what happens when this kind of research after funding ends is also always problematic. It is hard to define the impact of certain types of work, especially in the current academic culture. And last but not least, participatory AI work imposes a heavy toll on individuals in terms of time, but also and foremost in terms of emotional labor. On a more positive note, we think there is a lot to do in the space of crafting and using AI boundary objects, in using also our traditional design expertise. We see AI boundary objects as something that can help us challenge the AI epistemological apartheid and the mirage of objectivity and scientism, creating bridges to alternative ways of knowing that are rooted in the lived experience of people who are marginalized and minoritized. So we see AI boundary objects also as something that can function as a form of adversarial design. So not just easing AI adoption, but also inhibiting its uptake by manifesting controversial aspects and opening up spaces for contestation and dissent. But doing this work is really non-trivial. We see a lot of examples in which the designers report on developing demos, prototypes, and then saying that these basically didn't really work so much. And I love this quote from Abdu and colleagues that says, boundary objects cannot travel alone. Expertise is needed to shepherd and use such boundary objects effectively in order to broker meaningful trust and participation. So the craft of boundary objects is intertwined with the modes of participatory engagements. And based on all this, we feel like there is a lot we can do, but first of all, we should and can rethink the role of artifacts as things that can open up spaces for agonism to flourish. And also, we need to loosen our academic ambitions, maybe, in favor of building large and long-term alliances with diverse subjects and ways of working. But again, this requires us to look beyond standardized metrics of academic success, explore the specific challenges that different algorithms carry for participatory AI research. And also, we need to critically scrutinize whether and how participatory AI can work in different stages and contexts of AI development. That's all. Thank you so much, and also thank you so much to the people that regularly support us and work with us on this journey.
Thank you, Luce. Questions? Anyone? Yes. I don't know who was quicker. Okay. It's coming.
Hello, thank you so much for this work. I'm over here, sort of like in front of you in the back. Yeah,
oh, yeah,
I'll stand.
Sorry, thank you.
I'll stand.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Kayla. I'm at Georgia Tech. I wanted to address the point you made at the end that scientific papers can't be our main form of value creation. In my work, that makes me think a lot about who decides that that's the currency that we use. So I was curious where you think, I guess, like power is sort of contained in terms of controlling the motivations that make a lot of this sort of dialogue work so hard.
Sorry, so you mean about having papers as a main outcome for this type of work, but then the second part, can you
Yeah, I was more so pointing at that as an example
Yeah.
of how a organizational, institutional incentive
Oh, yeah, yeah.
discourages
Yeah,
all
yeah,
of this.
totally.
Who does that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And actually, this is something I think also in Italy, it's really interesting. We know that, for instance, Sky papers are, how to say, something that buys us in collaborations with industry, for instance, can get us promotions, and we are all here because there is a prestige associated with that. We are all playing this game. Sorry, this light is really strong. I want to look at you. And in a way, we are complicit in this, but at the same time, and the institutions we are part of really push for that. But I think there are also, at least in Italy, I've been part of groups, self-organized groups among academics that were trying to discuss what else can we push for, what other type of outcomes can be valued. And there is lobbying work to do in that sense, at least in universities, at least with my experience in Italy and I think also in the Netherlands. If we organize and we push, for instance, there is a lot of design work that very often is hard to publish in regular academic papers, but then maybe you created an exhibition and that's really valuable work, and then you have a catalog and other forms of reach that are extremely powerful. And I think we really need to make lobby and try to make it as a metric also for internal promotions and yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. Please give her another round of applause. And next up, we have Yachong Lee from Fudan University presenting the paper titled Power Echoes, Investigating Moderation Bias in Online Power-Asymmetric Conflicts.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Yachong Li, a PhD student at Fudan University. Today we'll talk about moderation biases in online power asymmetry conflicts, and many thanks to my co-authors for their brilliant contributions.
Sí, vamos a change the color.
Okay, thank you for waiting. And digital platforms like Twitter and Yelp always have conflicts among different roles, like merchant and consumers, over product quality and service problems. These conflicts often occur within relationships with power asymmetry, which means a state in which differences in status exist between individuals and groups of individuals, and these differences result in differential ability to take action or cause action to be taken. So this conflict moderation is power asymmetric, requiring making a judgment on who is more credible and who should be supported in the context of this power asymmetry and the ambiguous statements of both parties. Nowadays, digital methods change the way users obtain and process information, influencing what users can see, how much they can see, and in what order they can see it. And conflict resolution strategies can also be characterized into three types, which is human-led, AI-led, and human-AI collaboration. So, however, most studies assume equal status between the conflict parties. We also find that human moderators can be influenced by factors such as personal characteristics, contextual ambiguity, and workload constraints, and AI-assisted moderation may exhibit bias rooted in training corpora and also has algorithmic compliance effects. So, we pose the two research questions. First, what types of power-related biases do human moderators exhibit when moderating power-asymmetric conflicts? And second, how will AI-generated suggestions influence human moderators' power-related biases in power-asymmetry conflict moderation? Will the biases be amplified or mitigated? We conduct an empirical analysis to investigate power manifestations using online consumer-merchant conflicts as the scenario, and derive potential bias characteristics according to the social power theory, dividing power into legitimate, coercive, reward, etc. And we choose the Dianping platform for data collection. It presents conflict samples, allows different users to vote, and displays the voting results and detailed reasons. Here is an example of the public review function, as you can see in the slide. We select 100 initial samples of the top 5 topics by quantity. Each topic contains 20 samples, 10 supporting merchants and 10 supporting consumers. We adopt a qualitative analysis to code and characterize the conflict corpora. All conflict samples can be covered by the 6 power types. So finally, we extract 10 forms of power manifestation, including legitimate claim, authoritative citation, punishment threat, compensation, expert knowledge, group preference, statement order, expression tone, choice trap, and length difference. So based on this table, we employ an intervention method to explore the power-related biases of moderators. The intervention method introduces bias-related perturbations and compares the judgment differences between the original situation and the perturbed conditions, thus revealing potential bias patterns. We initially prepare experimental data by adding perturbations associated with each bias to the real conflict corpus. So based on the 100 initial samples, 2,000 samples are attempted, and 100 initial, 1,900 perturbed samples. So you can see in the table, it presents an initial sample and how this sample be changed into the corresponding perturbed versions. We also recruited 50 participants, all participated in phase 1 and 15 participated in phase 2. We adopted a mixed method design, including between subjects and within subjects factors. The between subjects factor is whether there is an AI-generated suggestion, and the within subjects factor is whether there is a perturbation. So the experiment includes 2 phases. Phase 1 is online judgment task. Participants rate some conflict samples on isopod program. You can see at the figure left, and determine which party is more reasonable. The AI-generated suggestion is visible only to the human-AI collaboration group, and the presentation of conflict samples adopts a case-to-condition randomization method. For the human-AI moderation group, we adopt a wizard-of-Oz method. You can see figure right, informing participants that the suggestions are curated by AI, especially LLMs, but actually by human beings. So after phase 1, we randomly select some participants to conduct a one-on-one interview and to get some deeper understandings in phase 2. For results, Table 3 shows the number of tasks completed by each group, and the distributions of the 2 groups are similar. Okay. For results, for comparison, the results of human moderation between initial and perturbed conditions, we find that 5 power manifestations can significantly affect moderators' judgments, including legitimate claim, punishment threat, compensation, expert knowledge, and length difference, triggering moderators' biases towards supporting the powerful party. For comparison, the results of human-AI moderation between initial and perturbed conditions, we find that 5 power manifestations can affect moderators' judgments, including the bias above, and you can see it shows that it can triggering biases towards supporting the powerful party as well. And compared to the results of human moderation, the introduction of AI-generated suggestions alleviates moderators' biases in supporting the powerful party, including punishment threat, compensation, expert knowledge, and length difference bias. But however, AI amplifies the legitimate claim bias and introduced a new authority citation bias. Besides, the reasons for unsupporting the opposite party have a significant effect. We also conduct more in-depth analysis by considering moderators' 2 basic demographic characteristics, age and gender. For age, both groups show significant effects on the punishment threat and length difference perturbations. For gender, both groups are affected by the punishment threat perturbation, with a stronger effect size in the female group. So our experimental results show that in both human and human-AI moderation, all have some power-related biases towards supporting the powerful party. This indicates that bias in power-asymmetric conflicts is not incidental, but rooted in long-standing social opinions. To alleviate moderation biases, first, anonymization and symmetrical information presentation can be considered to reduce biases associated with roles. And second, bias reminders and counterfactual comparison mechanisms can also be explored. Our research also reveals the double-edged sword role of the moderator's perception of AI. Especially, moderators have a legitimizing effect on AI-generated content. AI-generated suggestions are not only perceived as reference, but as a completed verification, weakening moderators' motivation to re-examine the content. So uncertainty annotations like confidence intervals and multiple interpretations can be leveraged to replace deterministic expressions in systems, and introducing evidence chain tracing to enhance transparency. This study shows that moderators' judgment follows a certain common pattern, which can be standardized core procedures by introducing interactive checklists in future design. However, moderators' judgments exhibit some individual differences, which are related to factors such as their experience, demographics, and values. To balance consistency with diversity in moderation systems, functions like experience annotation, configurable value orientation settings, and hierarchical explanation interfaces can be introduced. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Yashong. Questions? Yes, there's a hand.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Elaine. I'm a PhD student at New York University. And my question has to do with your last slide where you mentioned that different moderators, like their values about, for example, do they value institutional stability versus like, do they tend to have a question power that can affect their judgment? And so I was wondering, did you survey your participants on like their other political beliefs and their other like thoughts about power, and to see if that could influence, to see if that carried over into this case, basically?
Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, it's quite important that we know that different participants have their own thoughts about power and their own values. But unfortunately, we haven't done this job to clarify how these participants think of power. But we just randomize them and try to make this study more reliable. But I think it's a quite hopeful direction. We can imagine that if we can know how participants perceive this power-asymmetric conflict and how and what types of their thoughts, maybe it's an interesting way. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Because I think like how people like perceive power and sympathize with power can definitely have an impact on like the outcome over here as well, where like of certain people, like moderators might definitely be more likely to sympathize with the powerful merchants, but that might not necessarily because of this circumstance, but because it's like a generalized belief that they carry throughout their lives.
Okay, in the interest of time, I suggest you continue the conversation afterwards. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next up, we have Ghadeer Awwad from the University of Michigan. And they're presenting their paper titled Digital Infrastructural Resistance, Working Around Severe Telecommunication Disruptions in Gaza.
It's not, excuse me, it's not appearing here.
Full screen, please. Full screen, please.
I got very confused, sorry.
Sí, sí, sí.
slides up there?
It is sharing. Sí, pero no es alrededor.
Is it a bad luck or what?
No. It's okay, you can share like this.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
it's fine. Well, thank you so much for being here. I feel extremely honored to sit in a big stage like this in front of a big crowd. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting Palestine. My name is Ghadeer Awwad, and I'll be presenting our work titled Digital Infrastructure Resistance, working around telecommunication disruptions in Gaza, a work co-authored with my advisor, Kentaro Tiyama. During the recent war in Gaza, Israel imposed communication blackouts and destroyed telecommunication infrastructure. Yet, despite escalating violence and a deepening humanitarian crisis, some Gazans were able to reestablish an online presence and resume communication. In our work, we ask three research questions. First, what was the nature of the interruptions in electronic communication during the Gaza war as experienced by Gazans? Second, how did Gazan activists and journalists continue to communicate with the outside world despite network losses? Third, how did Gazan activists feel about losses in communication ability and their own response to it? Some background. Israel's control over Gaza's telecommunication infrastructure started decades ago and looked in by the Oslo Accords of 1993. Although nominal authority was given to the Palestinian Authority, in practice, Israel retained control over spectrum, frequency, and infrastructure. Since 2007, an imposed Israeli blockade over Gaza has restricted imports over important and essential equipment, resulting in what residents name as infrastructural poverty. Even before October 2023, Gaza was limited to 2G mobile networks, where all communication passes through Israeli infrastructure, allowing surveillance. After October 2023, this fragile system became a method of war where communication blackouts coincided with military actions and telecommunication infrastructure was targeted. Palestinian scholars describe this environment as one of digital occupation where power over telecommunication infrastructure became a method of control. Related work has examined telecommunication disruptions and communication blackouts during political unrest. Prior research on telecommunication disruptions already explains how states use internet blackouts to suppress dissent. And related work already documents circumvention, alternative networks, and the human infrastructure in contexts like Iran, Tunisia, Kashmir, among others. But this assumes some residual infrastructure exists and rarely captures a case where telecom control, infrastructure destruction, and wartime urgency all coincide. Almost none of it addresses a context like Gaza, where infrastructure control is this total. Israel controls all spectrum, bandwidth, and routing for Palestinian territories. And infrastructure destruction is this severe, where physical annihilation of telecommunication systems continues. And the affected population is this determined to communicate with the world. We fill this gap by documenting novel low-tech and hybrid strategies. To examine how people maintain communication during blackouts, between June and August 2024, we conducted remote semi-structured interviews in Arabic with 18 Gazan activists and residents, using encrypted channels through iterative thematic analysis with open and axial coding to identify common themes across participants' experiences. Now the findings. In the paper, our findings describe different phases of communication availability, workarounds that participants use to continue communicating, and the motivations behind participants' attempts to communication. In this talk, I will focus on the last two sets of findings. We heard at least 19 distinct communication workarounds from our participants. This is a summary of those workarounds ranging from low-tech methods like handwritten messages, passed person to person, to broadcast radio updates, asynchronous voice messages, hospital Wi-Fi, community hotspot, foreign eSIM cards, and satellite internet. The colors indicate how often each method was used during blackouts period. Participants describe how maintaining communication during disruptions often required traveling to places where connectivity and electricity was available. Here, several people are gathered in a crowded outdoor area near community facility where someone with internet connectivity shares it as a hotspot. Sharing available connectivity was a common theme. This photo shows an internet hub set up by one of our participants. Initially, it was shared using Bluetooth. Later, they transitioned to Ethernet cables. It was set in a way that users had their own accounts, allowing for time-limited connectivity. Some of these services were offered for free, while others were available for a symbolic fee. Participants also described informal systems like street internet cards, prepaid scratch cards sold locally to access limited mobile data. The man in the picture built a wooden stand to elevate a phone to get connectivity to a non-Palestinian mobile operator with an eSIM, and then shared connectivity with others through street internet cards. Several participants reported going as far as possible using handwritten notes to continue their tasks during blackouts periods. PH shared, I tried to save the battery by writing ideas and reports in a notebook instead of a laptop. Sometimes I would send my reports by taking pictures of the entire report using my phone camera. Other times, the editors would call me and I would read it to them over the phone while they wrote everything down. Across our data, 3 characteristics emerged among those who were able to sustain communication during disruptions. As you can tell from the previous examples, a lot of creativity was used to communicate. In one case, a participant stood off in front of TV camera in the hope that their family could see them and know they are still alive. Also, maintaining connectivity required sustained effort. In some cases, people carried their devices and traveled long distances just to charge them to briefly access the internet, while still improvising other methods of communication to continue communicating with others. Third, getting connected to the internet often required anticipatory adaptation. As participants planned their connectivity around unstable networks, they sent smaller files and scheduled emails and social media posts when connectivity was more reliable or available, even at weird times. The motivations of our participants to communicate during communication blackouts varies. Every participant felt a strong attempt and a drive to maintain communication. They mentioned it was necessary for survival, for communicating with others, with loved ones, with the word, and for life and existence itself. It's hard to capture the multi-dimensions that Gazans had, and the multi-motivations, that Gazans had for communication, but the quote from P9 captures something. Once I connected while there was a dead donkey next to me. The smell was awful, but what could I do about the signal? Another day, they shot a missile into the sea right in front of us. I was delivering work to a journalist while also trying to reassure my mother. Once we even had a birthday party, downloaded a happy birthday song by going to the sea to connect, then came back to celebrate. Now the discussion. Our research documents extensive destructions of Gaza's telecommunication infrastructure since October 7 and the creative and persistent ways that Gazans maintained to communicate with the outside world despite it. Consistent with the prior research, our research shows that communication shutdowns rarely eliminate connectivity entirely. Communities facing digital repression often develop creative ways to stay connected. However, in Gaza, it's a more severe case. Infrastructure conditions shifted constantly across locations and over time as networks were destroyed, restored, and disrupted again. Our research contributes to research on infrastructure studies and digital repression by showing how richly communication practices adapt under extreme infrastructural breakdown. We call these practices digital infrastructure resistance, a response to digital repression in which people work creatively and energetically to maintain communication infrastructure even under severe conditions. In infrastructure studies, it's said that infrastructure remains invisible until it breaks down. In Gaza, the breakdown was dramatic and highly severe. In response, they rebuilt a patchwork communication infrastructure. Infrastructure also is always a socio-technical system involving not just technical fixes, but people dedicated to making it work. In Gaza, we saw exactly that. Any single workaround may be fragile, but together they endure because of ongoing socio-technical effort to keep communication possible. And finally, digital infrastructure resistance is resistance, a deliberate political act. For our participants, connectivity meant survival and a political action. They resisted allowing stories, voices, and experiences of survival under genocidal conditions to go unheard. Although our study did not set out to design interventions, participants' experiences suggest several ways allies could help. You can see them as a screen. Recognize internet access as a human right to, in conflict settings, ensure Palestinian sovereignty over infrastructure and spectrum, support distributed mesh communication like LoRa to enable peer-to-peer connectivity when cellular networks fail, develop a national emergency telecommunications plan via ITU to coordinate satellite access and humanitarian imports. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Thank you, Ghadeer. Questions from the audience? Over there.
Hi, thank you very much for this work. This is Curtis Heimerl, University of Washington. I'm curious, as someone who's worked in rural connectivity for much of my own career and seen very similar techniques to handle limited connectivity scenarios, this resistance lens that you bring to this work, do you think that is applicable outside of this major war, conflict scenario, where perhaps rural folks or other people in these challenging situations, I see you cited Michael Ann as a good example, potentially could be resisting against the metropole, potentially resisting against the Cubans resisting against the United States and their infrastructure. How broad do you see this lens applying to connectivity overall?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I read carefully the literature, and I noticed that many of the workarounds that we mentioned in the paper, they are been used in different settings and different countries, but with way shorter times because the struggle is either shorter or maybe people sometimes just to try to give up. And in Palestine in particular, not only in Gaza, because we have been living this struggle and the occupation has been there for 75, almost 76 years for now, I think it became like a nature in Palestinians to improvise and to find ways to communicate and keep in touch, trying to do something to resist the occupation. And that is because we lived it for a long time. It became a little bit more unique in comparing to previous sittings or other sittings in the world, because the war is continuous. Even though that maybe the world noticed in the last 2 years something major is going on in Palestine, but we've been living it for years. People have been disconnected for years. The blockade over Gaza has been going on since 2007. We tried to communicate it through different wars since 2014, 2007 before that, and 2019, 21. So, improvising doesn't continue. It takes different forms based on the level of severity of the struggle and attacks. And here I would like to note, it's not good that people suffer this way. It's not good that people need to improvise to transfer and transmit the reality of the violence that they are going through. So in Cuba, for example, it's been almost like similar situations, especially that there was communication blackout happened recently, but the improvising was a little bit different because it's not the same situation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jaden Farouk from the University of Cape Town, presenting their paper titled, I Participate, Therefore We Benefit, Ubuntu as a Relational Compass for Ethical Compensation in HCI.
Perfect. I feel extremely honored to be amongst this incredible group of authors and presenters where connectedness, power, and justice are central to their work. So thank you and good afternoon. Before I begin, I want to ask you something. Think of the last research study you ran. How did you compensate your participants and why that amount? My name is Jaden Farouk, and today I'm presenting our paper, I Participate, Therefore We Benefit, Ubuntu as a Relational Compass for Ethical Compensation in HCI. I'm representing my co-authors from my research lab at the University of Cape Town, and I would also like to offer our deepest gratitude to the communities of Ocean View, Sweetwaters, Ghadeer, and Nire, whose generosity, time, and knowledge made this research possible. We often treat compensation as a line item, time for money, an honorarium, a voucher. We follow IRB guidelines, stay within budgets, tick the ethics box, and often move on. But compensation is more than that. It is one of the primary ethical interfaces between researchers and the communities we work with. And when we treat it as a transaction, money for data, we risk reproducing the very extractive logics we claim to oppose. So in this work, we turn the lens on ourselves. We are 9 researchers reflecting on our own projects across South Africa and Ghana through collective autoethnography. More specifically, we explore how our compensation models were inadequate for our community partners, how they evolved, and how HCI research in similar contexts can leverage our lessons learned to establish sustainable, reciprocal, and meaningful research collaborations with communities. Making the determination of fair compensation is genuinely difficult, especially in high unemployment context. Pay too much, you risk coercion, where economic precarity removes any real sense of voluntary choice. Pay too little, exploitation, an asymmetric exchange that takes more than it gives. And unjust inducement sits in between, where lower incentives draw in the most economically vulnerable while the outcomes benefit someone else. These concerns shape the budget lines we write, and they're why we need a different frame altogether. There is a rich tradition of African indigenous philosophies that offer alternatives to transactional models of research. These include Osetua, a Maasai concept of kinship and mutual care, Ukusisa, a Zulu practice of giving that builds community, not dependency, and the Sand Code of Research Ethics, the first ethics code issued by an indigenous group in Africa. But we center on one in particular for this paper, and that is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a Southern African philosophy of radical interdependence. It is commonly explained through the isiZulu maxim, Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. A person is a person through other persons. To echo the words of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, my humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. Your well-being and mine are not separate problems. What does this mean for research compensation? It shifts the central question, not did we get our money's worth or did we compensate enough, to rather did we honor the relationship? I want to show you what that shift looks like in practice through 2 examples from our fieldwork in the form of vignettes. In Sweetwater, South Africa, one of our lead researchers had to cancel a workshop due to a health emergency. She informed the partner community, rescheduled, and apologized. A community member came back to her and said, I planned for the workshop that day. What must I do now? I expected the money. She needed it for household expenses that week and was relying on that payment. Another community member asked for a workshop to be moved earlier. because she needed funds for basic needs that couldn't wait. We began realizing something uncomfortable. We weren't just researchers. We had become part of a system supporting livelihoods. We also saw this in who kept being recruited, the same people session after session because they were available. Most people who were employed were working 6 days per week, including weekends. The collaborators who were available were unemployed and could offer their time and expertise on an as-needed basis. Participation had become an economic survival strategy, a kind of research gig economy, with us as the platform. At the same time, quietly and invisibly, women were spending part of their compensation on childcare just to attend, despite on-site childcare being offered. They preferred to participate in this way. What resulted was them paying a participation tax that few others faced. So informed by Ubuntu, we were encouraged to ask, if our well-being and theirs are truly intertwined, what does that demand of us? This was no longer just about compensation, but responsibility. It was about the unintended consequences of our research timelines, our cancellations, our decisions. They were shaping people's ability to meet basic needs. Ubuntu asks us to see participation as part of a shared system in which we are already implicated, not just a contribution to the study. Our answer was simple but difficult. We honor the time reserved unconditionally. We look beyond what is produced and focus on the relational connections that make research possible, acknowledging that someone made time for us and in some cases depended on that time. In rural Ghana, we faced a different challenge. The research team was working with a Nyire community, a community of over 2,000 people. Individual payments at scale was simply not possible. So the team asked a different question. What does this community actually need, and what do we have to offer? The answer came outside of the bounds of spreadsheet cells. It came from being present, listening, observing. There was a local school with hundreds of students and far too few teachers. So the research team contributed their time. They taught literacy and mathematics throughout their stay. Just this shift in thinking about payment schemes led to more meaningful participation with the community. It became about redefining reciprocity with the community while becoming temporary community members. We moved from a model veering close to extracting value to contributing to a shared one. Of course, we want to be careful about saviorism and researcher burnout, both of which we touch on in the paper. But this is what Ubuntu-informed reciprocity actually looks like: indirect, messy, but most importantly, relational. A counter-gift offered because their flourishing and ours were understood as the same endeavor. From these experiences and months of collective reflection as a research team, we developed a relational framework, a compass for guiding compensation practices, especially with low-income community partners. I'll summarize it in 3 shifts. First, for researchers, co-design compensation with communities before the project begins. On a time, unconditionally. Don't just ask what you're paying, but what language you're using, what hierarchies you're reinforcing, and what the relationship looks like after the grant ends. Second, for institutions, fund community benefit, not just participation. Support long-term accountability and include community voices in governance. And third, for the Kai community, require compensatory ethics statements, especially in work with low-income and underemployed groups, and expand who defines what good and valuable research looks like. The full framework is in the paper. The title of the paper is a deliberate echo of René Descartes, I think, therefore I am. A statement of individual existence. We propose a shift for research engagements, guided by Ubuntu's premise that our existence is primarily interdependent and interconnected. We see participation as a fundamentally relational act, negating it as simply a transaction between an individual and an institution. When participation works, most benefit. When it doesn't, someone is extracted from. So I'll return to the question we started with. The next time you set a compensation budget or a protocol, don't only ask, what is this person's time worth? Ask, what does this exchange say about who we are to each other? Thank you. Encouraged by my peers, I'll end by stating that I'm actively seeking postdoc opportunities in community-centered co-design, critical computing, and digital health and well-being. Thank you so much for your time and for being here and for listening.
Thank you very much. Questions from the audience?
Great, thank you. This is great. I'm Houda from the University of Maryland, and I had a question about how do you define compensation? Do you involve participants early on or the communities early on? And do you have an example of that?
Yes, so in our later projects, we began realizing that we needed to move beyond the strict requirements of our ethics review board, because we are required to declare and fit within the bounds of what is sort of the bounds of compensation and what they consider coercive or coercion. And what we realized is that expanding compensation beyond the financial incentives, especially in this community, and communicating and working towards a model that acknowledges collaboratively what benefit we are both getting, what reciprocity looks like. Co-designing that early on was for us an important part of creating a sustainable relationship with those communities. And that looked like becoming part of the research, of the community as research team, and seeing that all of the outputs and all of the fruits of our relationship are shared amongst ourselves, but while acknowledging that there are certain asymmetries in the academic benefit we get by publishing papers and traveling and professional upward mobility, but recognizing that compensation also looks differently to the monetary exchange, and especially recognizing that that's the case, that in the case of underemployed and low-income communities, that particular power dynamic is especially magnified and heightened. So it is about diversifying the ways in which we think about compensation, and it does mean co-designing for context-specific situations. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Jaden. Another round of applause, please. Now for our last but not least speaker, Maria Normark from Uppsala University, presenting their paper, Civil Data Disobedience, Navigating Data Interaction Challenges in Human Rights Defense Organizations. You're aware probably that we're eating in our lunch break. Thank you very much for sticking around, especially because this paper won a Best Paper Award.
Al otro se le pone sí, pero se le pone eso ahí y las notas, o sea, desaparecen las notas y es como que se cruzan. Sí. Pero voy a...
Okay, so thank you so much for this award, and thank you all for staying for this final presentation in this session. My name is Maria Normark. I come from Uppsala University, and I've written this paper together with Karin Hansson and Mattias Jakobsson from Södertörn University. And the title of the paper is Civil Data Disobedience, Navigating Data Interaction Challenges in Human Rights Defense Organizations. So I will talk about how human rights defender organizations navigate data in their everyday work. By human rights defenders, I refer to organizations that support groups such as sexual minorities, homeless individuals, refugees, and survivors of domestic violence. These are the groups we have investigated. These groups are often volunteer-based organizations that increasingly depend on data for coordination, communication, and advocacy. Data practices are structured by legal frameworks and require secure infrastructures that these organizations often can't afford. So this leads to a central dilemma. On the one hand, data is essential for advocacy, for securing funding, and for coordinating activities. On the other hand, the same data can expose vulnerable individuals and create real safety risks, and not only for the groups that they support, but also for the volunteers. And this has to do, of course, with the current political climate. In addition, regulations such as the GDPR introduce further constraints on how data can be handled. So these organizations are constantly navigating a tension between protecting data and protecting people. Given this tension, we were interested in how do organizations actually navigate this increasingly data-intensive landscape. This is particularly relevant in welfare state contexts like Sweden, where digital infrastructures are highly developed and deeply integrated into everyday life. Our study is guided by 3 research questions. How do organizations experience interacting with data? What strategies do they adopt, and how does GDPR affect their work? And very shortly about GDPR is the European law called General Data Protection Regulation, and it means that organizations can only store necessary data, they need to keep data secure, and they can't share it without the consent of the user, and they need to allow users to access, correct, or delete their data if they want. So the theoretical lens, to approach these questions, we draw on critical data literacy and data feminism. Data feminism emphasizes that data is never neutral, but shaped by structures of inequality, care, and power. Critical data literacy, in turn, expands the notion of data skills to include understanding the social and the material consequences of data. It involves assessing risks, interpreting context, and recognizing power relations embedded in data practices. Together, these perspectives allows us to see data practices as situated, relational, and ethical, rather than purely practical or technical. Methodologically, we aim to understand the lived experiences of data work in human rights organizations in Sweden. We studied 7 organizations working in different areas of human rights. We conducted 8 semi-structured interviews with volunteers and group members working in the organizations, complemented by social media observations for a couple of months and analysis of policies and documents. And this material was analyzed using reflexive thematic analysis. From this analysis, we identified 3 overarching themes of how organizations interact with data. First, practices of avoidance and refusal to use data. Second, situations where organizations transgress rules and regulations in order for the greater good. And third, the use of data as an organizational resource Together, these themes show that data interaction is not a straightforward process, but involves continuous negotiation and difficult trade-offs. So the first theme, avoidance and refusal. Organizations often deliberately avoid digital systems because of the GDPR. They store sensitive data on paper and limit what information is shared online. And this creates quite a lot of problems for them. They may also hide locations, avoid showing faces, or restrict the use of digital devices altogether to keep both the people they support and the volunteers safe. These practices are motivated by the need to protect vulnerable individuals. Importantly, this is not only about lacking technical capacity, but about making informed decisions. In this context, non-use becomes a form of care and protection. And here is a quote from our data. One of our informers says that, certainly we have a website, but we never write our address, for example. We also don't often specify where, when, and how we meet. But at the same time, we need some kind of calendar to show, like to the authorities, that we have activities, because they go in and look up information, and then we get money based on it. So this shows the kind of tensions and conflicts that happens around this kind of data. The second theme is about transgressing data rules and regulations. So these organizations tend to bend and break data regulations when needed. For example, they may share personal data when necessary to help someone access work or services. They may also act as proxies, for instance, by using their own data, like their own resources they have, in order to help someone else. So they tend to be sometimes a bit illegal in order to solve the problem. And we have an example here from one of our informants that says that, and this regards young refugees that get deported if they don't find work in a certain time. And we are several organizations that work together, and then this becomes very difficult. Like, what do we do with personal data? At the same time, we know that our young guys, they couldn't care less if we share their personal data. That is, unless there is something really extreme. But they're desperate for work, so they don't give a crap about whatever we do with their data. But we can't do it, and I actually see that as a big problem. So this is an example of the kind of situations where these young people, they can't afford to have privacy around their data. And these cases illustrates how strict compliance can sometimes conflict with the immediate needs of care and support. So the final example here, at the same time, organizations cannot simply avoid data. Data is essential for securing funding, maintaining legitimacy, and demonstrating impact. They use data for reporting, communication, and advocacy. However, visibility also creates risks, for example, by exposing sensitive information or attracting unwanted attention. And we have this example here from one of our informants that says that, no, but I know that at one point I was advertising for the organization. I had posted something that I thought was important on our wall in Facebook. And then I brought some advertising, and it's cheap, so you can do that. But then we only received this hate stuff. So it was very sad, I felt. I'm never going to buy advertising again because it becomes so negative. So data is both necessary and very troublesome. It enables actions, but also introduces these kind of vulnerabilities. So to conclude, our study shows that non-use and refusal should be understood as protective and deliberate choices, rather than signs of lacking competence or lacking understanding. We also see how volunteers develop their own forms of data practices, creating rules, sharing experiences, and sometimes acting as proxies, which together form a kind of grassroots data literacy. Finally, we highlight how regulations such as the GDPR, while designed to protect individuals, can in practice make it harder for those in precarious situations to receive help. Overall, our findings show that data requirements and laws should be rethought, not only to protect the majority in society, but to support care, safety, and the realities of people who need the protection the most. Thank you. And please consider submitting to the critiques track at Nordica this year.
Thank you, Maria. Questions? Yes.
Hi, Maria. Thanks for your talk. So in the last quote you showed, the one about the hate on social media, there seemed to be some market mechanisms at play as well with the ad that, and I was wondering if that was the case, or if you can elaborate on any tension between the use of the platform, the market, and the work that those organizations were doing. I don't know if it was a public one or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the problem here in this case is that the algorithms not only share information to those who are interested, but also those who are very critical towards certain issues in society. So in this case, more of those who are critical came to look at the message and got that kind of information in their feed. So that's I mean, it's very sad. It's very heartbreaking when you see them, because they work very hard, and when they can't share stuff without getting this kind of hate.
Okay, thank you very much. Final round of applause. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy your lunch.